Hello and welcome to the SITS expert talk about ransomware. My name is Mike Morgenstern. I'm the CTO of AV Test, and we focus on research in regards to malicious activities and especially ransomware these days. And with me is Tobi Träbing from the company XM Cyber.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike. Thank you for having me. As you said, my name is Tobi Träbing. I'm a technical director of EMEA over at XM Cyber. Basically, XM Cyber is the leading provider of attack path management solutions, which we'll touch base upon today as well. But Mike, actually, I have a question for you. If we think about ransomware attacks, just generally speaking, right, do you see that there is a specific line of business or vertical that are the main targets of ransomware attacks?
Right. Unfortunately not. So I would have to say that everyone is a target, no matter if small or medium business or even Fortune 500 enterprises. And you have to remember that all attackers have in mind is the maximum financial gain. So they don't really care who they attack as long as they can get their money. Different studies do list top 10 verticals, however. For example, Trellix reported banking, utilities, and retail as a top 3 for 2021, while Sophos reported media and again retail and utilities for 2022. And other targets include transport, professional services, education, and even healthcare. So this really shows that there may be some that are more often targeted, but in the end, everyone can be a target.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, actually. And whenever you open up like technology newspapers on the web and you read through the latest and greatest news headlines, this is kind of what I'm feeling as well. But with that, actually, can you describe the landscape of security incidents a bit more? What are like the most important categories that you guys see?
Yes, certainly this is ransomware because it has such a big impact. And what you also have to see is that everything is connected to each other. So it's not like ransomware attacks just happen on its own. It usually starts with something like identity theft. So this may be used to set up phishing campaigns or other social engineering attacks, which could then lead to credential theft. And this in turn is one of the major infection vectors that will then lead to ransomware. An IBM study from 2021 found that around half of all ransomware attacks happened through phishing or social engineering. And this means that attackers are no longer breaking into your systems, but they are logging into your systems. And this really gives a completely new perspective. So, of course, you still have to protect yourself from security vulnerabilities, but that's not enough anymore. There's another angle that attackers will use. And now a question for you, Tobi. What do you think are the most common exposures that lead to ransomware compromise? And what are some of the best practices you recommend to reduce the risk?
I think you've raised a very valid concern. Attackers or adversaries are not breaching your systems anymore, but they're just logging in. Identity theft is certainly one of the biggest issues that we are seeing. Though also consider, for example, initial access brokers selling initial accesses into companies on the darknet for very little amount of money, right? So I think when an attacker is really, or even a ransomware family is actually getting into a network, they very often exploit somewhat known and common software vulnerabilities, but also IT security misconfigurations like over permissive users or user credentials, or the same local credentials to propagate themselves through the network, or you could call it lateral movement as well, right? But understanding the chaining of those different security issues is really the key to overcome security threats, particularly actually ransomware families. And you've asked about essential steps or recommendations on how to overcome that, or how to basically limit these security issues. And I think there are maybe 2 or 3 that I can think of right now. I think continuous visibility of all of the attack techniques and vectors, they need to be basically there to understand the overall exposure. Companies need to implement a robust yet intelligent vulnerability management process. And we're not talking about software vulnerabilities only, like CVEs, but all security related issues. And this process, this vulnerability management process, needs to be part of a robust IT security hygiene program to overcome so-called siloed issues in a more holistic way to reduce any negative impact of infection or attacks themselves. Like with that, actually, and considering that respectfully, but what have been the trends in 2021? Which are the areas that are the most prominent ones? Which incidents were the most notable ones in the media as well? Do you have any insights into that?
Well, actually, I would like to start with a look at the history. So if we look back how ransomware started at all, then what we see is that this kind of malware was just locking your device, then it threatened to delete your data until you would pay a ransom. And this later evolved into what we now understand as ransomware, malware that will encrypt your data and demand a ransom to decrypt them. So this is what everyone understands when we talk about ransomware. But lately a new approach was also introduced, which we call double extortion ransomware, which means on top of just encrypting files, the data is also exfiltrated and the attacker threatens to release the data, which could be very sensitive if no ransom is paid. This is the one thing. And the other thing is that we see a constant improvement in the technologies used and the approaches used. The ransomware and malware gets more sophisticated all the time, which is also because protection products like endpoint protection and EDR products are improving as well. So we really see an upwards spiral here. Yeah, it's really like that the attackers and the protection vendors are chasing each other's. Toby, what I wonder about is the timing issue. So do you think timing is a crucial factor for ransomware attacks? And how do attack path management services factor in when it comes to reducing cyber risk and closing security gaps?
That's an excellent question, or actually two questions that you just raised. Let me start off with the first one, timing. Absolutely, timing is definitely a crucial factor for ransomware attacks, but malware infections in general, right? Some attacks will only be successful at a certain time of the day or night, or on a certain day of the week, for example, weekends. Just because you may reach less security conscious or security focused stuff at night or on weekends, right? In the early morning, as an example, a phishing email may reach an employee that might otherwise have already been receiving a warning from the IT department about that phishing email, right? So timing is absolutely a factor when it comes to infections. Timing is also a critical factor in understanding attack path and exposures within companies themselves. Very often, companies and responsible stakeholders use, I'm going to call them ad hoc processes, somewhat timely, inefficient ways to assess the infrastructure, like common vulnerability scans, right? Or pen tests, for example. They look at a very specific environment at a given time. So these analyses only provide some kind of a snapshot of a given time frame or of an environment, right? And this will not really help any organization to keep control of the ever-changing landscape of their environment. And when I speak to my customers, they often express to me that, hey, Toby, we're currently seeing, let's say, hundreds, maybe even thousands of different changes a day. Of course, that plays into the overall landscape of the environment and the security posture of it, right? And if you then calculate also factors like cloud or infrastructure as a service providers in, those are being used to basically enable the business to run operations even faster than before. Yet this dynamic is increasing the risk of overlooking exposures and security issues themselves as well. And as the attack path management services really run continuously, so 24/7, the platform can tell organizations at any given point in time what their exposures are, how the changes within the environment are affecting these exposures. And therefore, those attack path management services really help to quickly understand and easily understand the impact of new security issues. For example, Log4j as a quick example. It also helps to measure and quantify the cyber risk, to communicate that to other stakeholders within the company, for example, the board or C-level management. And also it helps to understand what can be done to overcome the exposures in the most efficient way.
Thanks for that. So you mentioned a few common and more general examples here. You mentioned Log4j as one of the vulnerabilities that caused some issues, but are there any unusual exposures or unusual attack paths that you have encountered, and how did organizations overcome the risky exposure at that point?
That's also a good question, actually. Even though environmental IT security exposures are very often somewhat similar to each other, we constantly uncover new exposures with the attack path management platform as well, right? These range from easy credential dumping techniques to using that identity for malicious activity, into turning into complete domain trust attacks, or even takeovers, worse, actually even golden ticket attacks. However, you ask for a specific example, and I think I do have a good one for you. I do remember one specific attack path that we were able to uncover in a factory of a manufacturing client. I'm going to call it believed secured server was used for coordinating unglued vehicles, right? Those vehicles in the company in that factory were basically transporting goods from A to B, right? Just as part of the normal operations they were doing there. However, that server could have been compromised by leveraging not only software vulnerabilities, but also misconfiguration from, well, any office endpoint, really. We identified the attack path and were able to harden the IT environment to further basically secure and isolate that server. But in addition, actually, we helped the client to get in touch with the server and application vendor and provided those insights into the attack techniques, which basically led to the vendor hardening their application as well as the server, making all of their customers a bit more secure as well. Speaking about unusual attack paths, like what is kind of the most unusual ransomware attack that you've encountered recently?
Right, this is probably when Lockbit attacked a children's hospital in England just recently, and then later posted a public apology and provided decryptor for free. And this is something that's really, really unusual because such attackers never let go a chance to earn money, but in this case they did. And this case is also a great example for one of the most interesting trends in the ransomware industry, I think. After the incident, Lockbit claimed a partner for the infection. And this constellation was made possible by the fact that Lockbit provides affiliates access to the malware in return for cut of the ransomware profits. So ransomware as a service. And this really shows how big this problem is. So for each ransomware author, so each ransomware attacker like Lockbit, there's not just this group attacking someone, but there's also lots and lots of affiliates that can use this ransomware to attack even more companies and organizations.
I see. Thank you, Mike, for those insights. I'm wondering, in the beginning, you talked about the history of ransomware, where it was coming from, where it is developing. Now we're talking about ransomware as a service, business partners or affiliates, as you call them. In that way, it looks like attacks or even ransomware families and groups are getting more sophisticated. Is that what you also see?
Absolutely. I mean, we've briefly touched on the technology part. So, of course, ransomware, malware is improving on the technology side. But what we are also seeing is that attackers behave more sophisticated these days. So, in the beginning of the ransomware area, an infected system would be encrypted right away and the ransom would be demanded by the attacker. However, these days, it's not like that anymore. So attackers wouldn't know whether this was an interesting high-profile target or not. So attackers learned that they could earn more money if they attack certain organizations with more sensitive data. So they will start to carefully assess the situation once they have access to a network to decide whether this is a good target at all. And then they will start to move through the network and look for the most sensitive data, the most sensitive systems where they could exfiltrate or encrypt data from. And this allows attackers to use their resources on those targets that would possibly pay higher ransom fees. And at this point, I wonder, how could attack path management services help? And how would your services support organizations in preventing and mitigating ransomware risks?
No, that's a good question as well. Thank you, Mike. So first of all, attack path management services, by using the XM Cyber platform, continuously assesses all of the different attack vectors and techniques of ransomware families to basically understand how they could spread within a customer network, right? Being able to understand the underlying security issues, for example, software vulnerabilities, but also IT security hygiene issues, misconfigurations, risky user behavior, etc., is really key to stopping and preventing ransomware attacks. The platform provides an overview of the entire network and how attackers can see that network. And with the managed services from your company, the SITS group, companies will basically understand what needs to be fixed to stop the attack path of ransomware families to all entities, be it in the cloud, be it on premise, or be it both, actually hybrid, right? But most importantly, towards critical assets to ensure business continuity and confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data itself. Mike, in your eyes, we're talking about attack path management, but in your eyes, what are the most effective measures to prevent ransomware attacks? Any insights?
Actually, it's the same measures that you hear all the time. And I'm just repeating them here right now. It really starts with using defense in depth. So with several security layers, and this ensures that even if one layer fails, there are still other layers that could stop or at least detect the attack. Just to give an example, you would have a firewall, a secure web gateway, endpoint protection, so the classic antivirus on your endpoint, and then some EDR or XDR product, which is observing your network and which could be used to detect a successful attack. So really, you need different layers at this point. But it shouldn't stop here. You also need to identify all the data and all the systems that need special attention or even extra protection, and then apply this. And last but not least, it's backups of all the data on a regular basis, and really make sure that those backups are complete and that they are indeed working.
Right. No, that's obviously great advice here. Thank you, Mike. I'm wondering, right? I mean, security breaches or incidents will still happen, right? No matter how good your protection layers are or detection layers are, no question about it. You need them. You need to have them in place. They will still happen. Breaches and incidents will still happen. So, in your eyes, what's kind of the best reaction in case something has happened already or is about to happen? Any thoughts around that?
Absolutely. So in an ideal world, it would be follow your recovery plan and use your backups. And I'm totally aware that this is probably not a reality for most companies. This would be the ideal solution, no matter, and you should work towards this to have something like this. But if that's not a reality for you, then you have to go with another approach. And so if something happened and you can't recover your data and your systems, then your best bet is to work with IT security experts that will try to decrypt your data and help you to get all your systems back up running so you can keep on working with your systems. It's absolutely not advisable to work with the attackers, as there's no guarantee for decryption. Your money will be gone, but if you ever get back your data, that's completely unclear at this point. So, Tobi, what I wonder about is, how could attack path management services help here and prioritize exposures?
Yeah, I think before we go into the details of the question, it's really crucial to understand that adversaries, attackers, or even just the automated spreading of malware is exploiting multiple issues. And I've basically touched base on them already. We talk about software vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, risky user behavior, etc. Right? In the past, companies usually address these three main pillars of breaches by a quite singular approach to them, right? For example, you're using a vulnerability scanner to scan for software vulnerabilities. You use a configuration management tool to overcome misconfigurations and so on. However, using all of that data in a single platform is really key to understand the overall exposure, right? Because that's what the malware, that's what the ransomware and the adversaries are doing as well, right? They are combining different issues. Rather than just working off long lists of, let's say, software vulnerabilities, the XM Cyber platform really helps to understand the exact exposure with other security issues like those misconfigurations, right? And since we are always focused on understanding the impact of the mentioned issues towards critical assets, the platform can easily prioritize the security issues with the related impact to the risk of the critical assets. And critical assets, again, might be anything that a customer is deeming for themselves as critical. A domain controller, of course, that's a critical asset, right? But for other customers, that one specific database server or that one S3 bucket in an AWS cloud or the container in an Azure world might be more critical than all of the other ones, right? But understanding the risk towards those critical assets is really key. And with that, organizations can actually work on the most critical security issues first to protect those critical assets, right? In addition, the platform will automatically identify, I'm going to call them critical key junctions within the environment, so-called choke points. Rather than addressing security issues on different machines or entities, customers can actually easily cut off an attacker at those choke points, those key junctions within the network, and break the attack path towards the critical asset. And Mike, I have a question for you. What are the challenges that actually prevent enterprises from protecting themselves more effectively? Of course, there are different things that we need to cover. Speed of changes, we were talking about changes already in the past, cost of update, possibly even the shortage of experts. What are your thoughts around that?
I think I could come back to what you just said in your previous answer. So one major reason is probably the complexity of today's organizations. So both on a personal as well as on a technical level. So examples are access to systems need to be managed on different levels for different persons. Who can access which systems and which data? Also, all of the systems have to be kept up to date with security patches, and configurations need to be evaluated and checked and verified constantly. And having defense in depth with different security layers is a great thing to have to improve your protection and detection. But at the same time, this also means that you will have to manage a lot more security systems. And many companies don't even have the experts to do that. So they really have to rely on external experts to manage these things for them. And then coming back to you, Tobi, can you explain why XM Cyber's attack graph modeling combined with SITS services would enable organizations to stay one step ahead of attackers and continuously reduce their cyber risk?
Yeah, Mike, thank you. That's a great question. And the question ties back actually combining a platform with a service approach back to the challenges of those clients that you were just referring to as well, right? But understanding the different attack path combined in an overall craft model is really key to understanding what attackers can do in organizations' networks, right? Eliminating key junctions, we called them choke points earlier, and using guided remediations really can help organizations to set up their security levels. However, using that, I'm going to call it platform approach in combination with the SIT services, organization can take it actually even further. With the collaboration of SITS and XM Cybers, organizations are being enabled to use the in-depth security knowledge of the SITS experts alongside their service offering, such as further adoption of the platform, detailed and tailored remediation proposals and implementation, alignment with existing risk management frameworks. And speaking about existing frameworks or processes, of course, companies usually already have security processes in place, and these SITS experts can really help to review and adopt where needed, right? Security processes, but also incident management integrations, as well as, and I think this is a critical part, immediate support in case of new highly critical vulnerabilities. For example, Log4j. these SITS experts can really help guiding organizations through those new exposures, tell them exactly what to do, what's needed, and where and when something is needed. And I think that's a key point with the services.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tobi. Thank you so much for your time and your insights here. I think we all agree that ransomware is one of the major, if not the one major issue for many companies out there. And I'm sure we all know that all the classic approaches like endpoint protection and backups and so on are an absolutely must to protect against ransomware. But what we have also learned is that ransomware attackers are taking new paths, are trying new technologies, new approaches, and we see breaches and ransomware cases over and over again. And I think this is where attack path management, like your solution provides, really comes in, because it matches exactly how modern ransomware actors are behaving. They will find all the critical assets and all the critical paths in a company network, and this is exactly what you are covering and how you could help improve the security of companies. And with that, I can only invite everybody to get in touch with us and try the solution and work with SITS to improve your security. So thank you again.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciating your time as well. And thank you for having me.